Yeah, no, thanks, Duncan. Morning, welcome everyone. I'm just gonna. Have you got the agenda there, Duncan? I've not got my email open.
I will stick it in the cloud in the chat as soon as I
Brilliant.
can. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I should have it open myself. Just while we're getting the agenda up, if there's anybody new on the call, I'm just wondering if anybody would like to introduce themselves and say hi to the group. Susan, I don't know whether if you're happy to say hello and do a bit of an intro, that would be great to hear from you.
Thought you might pick on me, yes. Hi, I'm Susan Fletcher. I'm working with Jen at Social Investment Business on the sort of communications and engagement side of our Just Transition community energy type programs. So Jen's on leave at the moment, so I'm just joining the call on her behalf. Probably won't have as much to contribute as she might, but be good to listen in and yeah, join in where I can.
Great. Well, you're very welcome, Susan, and good to meet you, and thanks for coming along. Anybody else like to say hi? I'm just wondering, Richard, do you want to say hi? Richard,
I was on mute. That good old typical mistake. Hello everyone. Yeah, no, I've come along. I'm a technical guy in the heat network world, so I wrote a lot of the guidance that all the HNS schemes are based upon, and I've run 17 HNS schemes personally, including the ones for Birmingham City, Southampton City, a bunch of councils and various stuff. So if there's any questions anyone's got technically or wants to know anything about the actual how the HNS process works, approval schemes, anything detail, I know I'm here for that.
And
Brilliant.
Richard has kindly made an offer to do a demo to us at a future meeting, and his website is heatweb.co.uk. We've got future meeting agendas on the agenda later.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Good to see you, Richard, and thanks for that.
My name's Sydney Charles, and this is going to be a whistle-stop tour. I was interested in. No, you don't want that yet. Turn that off. I don't think you want that at all, actually.
Anybody else like to jump in, or I'll move on to Joseph. I know you're new to the group, so do you want to say hi and give a bit of an intro as well, please?
Yeah, hi all. I'm Joseph Davis Coates. I joined Community Energy England last Monday, so everything's very new and fresh to me still, but I'm going to be their heat and retrofit coordinator. So over the coming months, I'm going to be ending up convening and hosting this group and the related energy efficiency group. And I'll be working with you, Kate, and all the other partners on this Net Zero Terrace Streets, and probably with Share Energy on their Community Heat and Development Unit, and the wider energy learning network, I think it's called.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joseph. And yeah, great to have you in post. I've just had notice from Innovate UK that actually this programme, the Net Zero Living that we're on with Rosendale Borough Council and Rosendale Valley Energy and Net Zero Terrace, it actually runs to the end of November. So I don't know whether you know that, Duncan, but that's new news for me anyway. So that's useful. And in that same vein as well, Andy, do you want to say hi in your new role as well, please?
Hi, I'm Andy. Sorry, it's taken me a little while to get on how to download Zoom before it would let me join. So it's a couple of minutes late starting. But I'm Andy. I started yesterday at Rosendale Valley Energy. So again, similar to Joseph, I'm quite new and fresh to this as well. But I am going to be the operations director for the Net Zero Terrace Streets program. So looking forward to it. Looking forward to getting my teeth into it. This was previous to this. I was very much energy efficiency background. Worked with charities and organisations to push net zero and alleviate fuel poverty. So really looking forward to getting going.
Right, thanks, Andy. Yeah, good to see you here as well. Anybody else want to say hi? Andy O'Brien, I don't know whether have you been on the group before? I know Bristol Energy have, but whether you in person.
I think I may have been in one a while ago, but I've been rather lurking in the background, trying to do too many things. So, but yeah, I'm now on the case, so I'm going to be a regular joiner.
Brilliant. Great. Well, yeah, thanks, Andy. Good to see you again. Anybody else? I'm just thinking. Oh, hi, David. You're on mute, David.
Yeah, hi, Kate. David Saunders, Bristol Resilience Network. We've just got some CEE funding, not Community Energy Fund funding for a pilot study, or to work towards a pilot study, which we want to, in part, at least replicate the Rossendale work. We're aiming towards a pilot in which we would retrofit one way or another 100 homes in 2 clusters of 10 in each parliamentary constituency in Bristol. So we're aiming to get political coverage as well as community coverage, and it should be quite interesting. And we hope to be working, amongst other things, with Bristol Energy Co-op to make this work.
Brilliant. Great, David. That's good news. Anybody else want to give any updates or introduce themselves? So yeah, hi, Ben.
Hi there, Kate. I don't know if you remember, we met at all-party parliamentary group for the waterways.
Yes.
Hi everyone. I'm new in position at Share Energy. I'm working with my colleague who's also on the call, Ben, on something called Community Heat Development Unit, which is some research looking at feasibility work in community heat networks. And I can see another one of my old colleagues lurking in the background as well, Iona Hodge from Local Energy Scotland. So I used to work at the Energy Saving Trust, and I've joined Share Energy inside the last week. So another new starter.
Brilliant. Oh, well, that's a great addition to the Share Energy team, Ben. So brilliant. Good to have you working on this as well. Great. Okay. Well, and Oliver Clay, that's another name I'm not quite familiar with. Whether you want to pop in and say hi, Oliver.
Yep. Hi, Kate. I'm with Andy. I've just started the Bristol Energy Cooperative as well. I'm a project developer. So yeah, I met David at an event last week, which kind of started last week. So I'm looking forward to getting into everything.
Fantastic. Great. Well, that's really good to have everyone on the call. Just to kind of reiterate what we're trying to do here for people who are new. This was set up probably about 18 months ago, just to try and facilitate learning between communities who are looking to do a whole, heat decarbonisation, but as well kind of whole systems decarbonisation. Obviously, there's lots of different ways of doing it. We've got examples like Swap and Prior, rural, centralised heat network. Kayla's done a lot of work historically, and Firl. And what was the other big one, Kayla, that you were working on a while ago at the same time as Firl?
We've done 6 heat network feasibility studies. We did Firl, Shoreham, Kent, Littlington. I don't know why it's slipping from my mind, but yeah, and that's a little bit about what I wanted to talk about today, sharing that experience and the learnings, and hopefully motivating other groups to get more involved with heat.
Brilliant. Yes, thanks, Kate. So there's lots of people trying to meet the same objectives in slightly different ways. This group is about trying to share that learning. So if we are going for community energy funding, for example, we can build on what's already known rather than replicating. Ben, do you want to say a little bit about the work you're doing with the Community Heat Development Unit?
Yeah, so at Share Energy, we've got a project running at the moment, which is the Community Heat Development Unit project, where we're trying to take a different approach for developing community-owned heat network projects, in that we are trying to identify what configuration would work for a district heating project, which is set up for community ownership, and identify locations where that kind of configuration could be deployed. So at the moment, we're kind of in our modelling and site identification phase. So Martin Crane from Carbon Alternatives is working with us to help us define this kind of generalised model about what configuration represents a feasible heat network, a feasible low carbon heat network. and we're doing some site selection work looking at heat density and distribution of different building types across the country, and also some quite like high level identification of renewable generation resources, so where we could deploy ground mounted solar and wind, and how that correlates with the location of heat demand as well. So that's the stage at the moment, and yeah, it's good that Joseph's joined now as well to help us with the community engagement side of things. So yeah, both from the perspective of trying to understand community attitudes and experiences with heat networks, and then also with engaging with communities at the sites where we're identifying as being feasible for like potential heat network deployment. So yeah, yeah, we're hoping to share as much of the outcomes and kind of step-by-step information which we're producing along the way. Yeah, we're just not quite at a stage where we've got anything kind of concrete to be able to share, but hopefully over the next couple of months we will do.
Sorry, Ben, can I just ask you to remind us what organisation you're from?
Sorry, Share Energy.
Oh, Share Energy.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and the project is funded through the Energy Redress Scheme.
Oh, good.
Thanks, Ben. And just to give it a bit more kind of that wider context, so Rosendale Valley Energy, we're working on Net Zero Terrace Streets project, which is a net zero living pathfinder, and we've just finished SIF Alpha, the Strategic Innovation Fund. That's through Ofgem and Innovate, and that's all about networks. So also working on SIF projects. Regen have finished or finishing a SIF discovery, and they're looking at rural decarbonisation of heat, working with NGED. Community Energy South have been working on CLIP. Oh, there's Robbie. Hi, Robbie from Regen. Community Energy South have just finished their discovery CLIP, which I think stands for Community Local Infrastructure Planning, but I sometimes get that wrong. So something along those lines anyway. So again, and also there's Low Carbon Oxford Hub have been working on Project Leon, which is a step along from their Project Leo, which was a Prospering for Energy Revolution project, and it's worth looking at all the Prospering for Energy Revolution work that was undertaken. You can Google that, there's some really useful stuff there, lots of it on smart local energy systems. So Project Leon, they have just done an application for SIF Beta as well. So what's really interesting is all these are community energy groups who are very willing to collaborate and share learning. So we've got a really good, strong network of people trying to unpick these very knotty problems and share the learning as we go. Okay, so I think if anybody else got anything to add in terms of quick updates on groups, and if not, we'll hand over to Kayla, who's going to give us a bit of an update on her work.
Chuck a quick one in there because I hadn't quite realised the scope of the meeting was. The other things we're also working on is there's a GitHub project, so it's setting up all of the standard technical procedures for heat networks and renewable energies in an open source project. So the whole industry is getting behind. So we're working on this with a load of manufacturers. We're drawing on about 1,000 plus zero carbon contracts a lot. So it's just, there's a technical resource designed for what you're trying to do in the making at the moment.
Brilliant. Have you got a link or anything for that, Richard? Something that we can
yes
signpost this to? Are you able to put in the chat, do you think?
I'll shove a few links in the chat. Yeah, okay.
That would be brilliant. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. Iona, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, it was just to say that so the scheme that I'm working on is Scotland, but it's a community heat development programme, and we're in the final year of that programme. So I'm looking for 10 more projects to come into the programme, and we're going to have to close to new inquiries by the end of August at the latest. So it was just if you knew of any projects in Scotland, any ideas really, it's very early stage ideas that we're looking for collaborative heat projects, please feel free to get in touch, and I'll stick a little bit of info in the chat, but I just wanted to flag that we're just looking to try and scoop up some more projects and really push it along in the next couple of months. Thank you.
Brilliant. No, thanks, Iona. Would Morven be eligible, do you think, Iona, on that one?
Potentially, I'll have a look at that one. Yeah, thanks,
okay.
Kate.
Right, I'll drop you an email about that. Brilliant. Thanks, Iona. Okay, so Kayla, is it okay to hand over to you, please?
Sure.
Okay, so BESCO was formed in 2013 as part of the community energy movement, and we have been a member of Community Energy England basically since the beginning. We have now a £2 million business. We're not working with our local authority at all, so that's been really hard graft, working on our own to develop and own and operate these projects. I'm the founder and the chief executive. We have 12 members of staff now. And I really see community energy as the solution to the consequences that the privatization of the energy industry and the sell-off of social housing has had on people's lives. And we do a lot of fuel poverty work. We do all the fuel poverty work for our local authority, and we still see unacceptable living conditions for many people across the country. So before I go into the HNES work that we've done, I just wanted to say that we have done 6 feasibility studies, 5 of them on rural heat networks in Crowhurst, Shoreham, Kent, like I said before, Littlington and East Sussex, and then these blocks of flats, and then 2 projects in the village of Firle, which is right outside of Lewes. And basically what we found is that you do need a certain amount of heat density in an area to lower the heat price to a sufficient level where it becomes economically interesting for participants. And so, for example, with Swaffham Prior, that the development costs of that project are really prohibitive to creating an affordable heat on a commercial basis going forward. It had quite a lot of subsidy, but I think working on heat networks in rural areas, our experience has been that the economics are really in the air source heat pump as opposed to running the pipe work in a heat network, and also looking at all different types of ownership construction, considering the heat network infrastructure will probably last about 75 years. The development of heat networks is one of 4 pillars of our growth strategy at BESCO because of the relationship between renewable heat and fuel poverty. So we need to demonstrate that our involvement in the transition to renewable heat means that people can live in comfort for an affordable price. And we need to work in partnership with industry to ensure that we achieve a fair and just energy transition. So the heat network efficiency scheme has been a really great inroad for us to start looking at blocks of flats along the Brighton and Hove seafront. We have quite a lot of blocks of flats in order to improve the ability of those buildings to retain the heat so that we can help these buildings convert from the gas boilers that they're using at present to renewable heating systems. We know that many people have to open their windows in winter because the buildings are overheating. And this type of waste is common across blocks of flats. The HNS project presents a great opportunity to address these issues. Martin Crane from Carbon Alternatives helped us win the funding for both of the HNS projects that I'm going to present today. In both cases, we were approached by the building freeholder to help them convert their gas boilers to a heat pump. There many building owners and managers are looking at how they're going to deal with the energy transition. And in the area that we're looking to develop a heat network, we have proposed improvements to the heat delivery systems. Because community energy groups don't receive the heat zoning information directly, it goes to local authorities. we're not sure if the area that we have determined that's suitable for a heat network has even been identified in the heat zoning. And we lost the bid to prepare Brighton and Hove's decarbonization plan. So we have to wait until the council releases it before we know what their plans are concerning the heat networks. I think that's a really important thing to talk about in the consultation that's coming up, that this kind of cooperation that's needed with local authorities. And so in order to prepare the building to retain the low temperature heat produced by a heat pump, we first have to measure the existing heating system, gathering the heat data. And Martin Crane was very helpful in getting the data loggers and installing these for us. The issues were primarily around heating controls, heat zoning, heat distribution systems, and ventilation. In the BESCO team, we have 2 engineers who are highly skilled in heat systems who worked very closely with Martin on these projects. So the first case study is Kingsway Court in Hove. They were a very willing customer who are really concerned about getting their building future-proofed and get it prepared to be able to convert from gas systems. So basically what we did for these customers is we ended up preparing a 50-page report with our recommendations, including what to do with the HNS capital funding and the estimated repayment periods and payback periods. For this building, it was mostly, the issues were mostly around ventilation and the heat distribution systems. And they have 2 gas 800 kilowatt gas boilers that would need to be replaced. The heat is primarily delivered by a warm air system with convectors in the flats. So the boilers provide the majority of the hot water, but the 8th floor and penthouse flats have separate hot water tanks heated by electric immersion heaters. Since the existing boilers are 20 years old, they're going to have to make a decision quickly. And so we think that we're not going to be able to get all of the investment required. So they're going to have to do an intermediary gas system before we can get the renewable heating system in there. So basically, there were 2 strategies that we presented, upgrading the existing warm air and ventilation system, or the second one was abandoning the existing warm air system and replacing the existing convectors. The cost of the improvements were about £320,000, which did not include the gas boiler replacement. Although there were significant cost savings that were identified, we didn't see that the payback would happen within the period of time. So, but the carbon savings were quite significant. But what we're seeing with our customers all across the board with every customer, and probably what most people are experiencing, is that people are making economic decisions, and it's very hard to get our customers to make decisions that are best for the environment. In the second case study, this is a building, it's a period building with important architectural features. You can see them in the windows. And so what happened here was we did the same thing. You see people opening their windows in the winter. It has a really inefficient heating system. And so it was a project that we worked on with Martin. Whoops. Can't go back. And so basically what we came up with was the installation of HIUs, and we would need a HNS capital grant for that to cover some of the cost of £873,000. We also did a proposal to finance the £4 million of cost that it would take to put in secondary glazing to retain the heat in that building. The estimated cost savings, again, we identified those, and we were managed to get the payback down to 12 years with significant carbon savings on that project. So clearly the HNS is very helpful in getting customers on the route to carbon savings. The main issue that we experience is the fact that now the HNS is being focused more on social housing. And so we're not able to work on these kinds of privately owned buildings again, which is kind of a pity because it stops our ability to continue doing this work in the city. And whoops, I can't move the oh, here we go. And so that's the presentation from my perspective. If you want to talk to us about HNS and the work that we've done, here's our contact details.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Kayla. And yeah, great to see, you know, a community energy group that's grown from, when did you found? Was it about 15 years ago, Kayla, or was it longer? 20 years?
No, since 2013.
2013.
So 11 years.
11 years. But yeah, it's great to see doing such mainstream large scale projects. So with the HNS, so you've done all this kind of feasibility work. Have you managed to deliver, or is that in train, or where's it up to?
Well, we made presentations to both of the buildings, and now they're deciding how they want to proceed. We've given them different financial options. They have everything that they need in order to make a decision, but probably other groups have this experience as well. It takes quite a lot of time for them to make up their minds about how they want to move forward. And I think that the replacement of the boiler, when that need occurs, that's going to obviously force a decision.
Yeah, no, thank you. And has anybody got any questions? I see Beans asked in the chat, Kayla, about what's the simple fossil fuel replacement.
Well, in both buildings, we want to put heat pumps. So that was the recommendation that we made. We're not going to recommend replacing it with gas, obviously, because then that embeds gas for another 15 years into these buildings. So we're pretty adamant about trying to help them raise the funding and make the changes that they need in order to be able to put in a heat pump.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kayla. I'll open it to the floor then for questions for Kayla. Does anybody want to either pop your hand up or jump in?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, Richard, go for it.
I was wondering if anyone's looked at bivalence systems, sort of keeping the existing gas boiler infrastructure there for the sort of 5% coldest part of the year. We sort of found that keeping some of the existing boilers, you half the amount, or almost a third the amount of heat pump infrastructure you've got to. So I just wondering if anyone's looked at these staged kind of keep a bit of the gas there as topping up before you go the whole hog.
Kayla, is that something you've looked at?
Yeah.
All these systems?
We have installed bivalent systems in some of our sites. It depends on the size of the plant room and whether or not we can fit in all of the kit. And also we looked at hybrid heat pumps, so more high temperature heat pumps is part of the solution. So there's different recommendations. I see that Martin's on the call. Martin, do you want to say anything about either Kingsway Court or
So basically the issues are heat pumps cost more to run and there's no funding for them. So it's a bit awkward that you've got to recommend more efficient gas boilers, which is not really the position one wants to be in. But as it is, HNES won't fund new gas boilers. So at both sites, the ambition should be to try and get the systems working as well as possible at as lower possible temperatures, so that at some point sense will prevail across government and heat pumps will be economic to run, and then there'll be an investment case to be made. But at the moment, the residents primarily interested in lowering bills. It's all a bit awkward on heat pumps because that's what we want to do, but it's not something you can put on people to increase their bills and find a pile of capital cost. I mean, these two projects are interesting because collectively they could be a Green Heat Network Fund application. So you get half the heat pump cost paid for, but you still got to find the other half, and the overall bill is still higher than the gas boiler bill. So so my focus on the HNES stuff is just what we can do to lower the network temperatures, so that then heat pumps can come along as a second stage. And at that point, we'll think on Richard's comments on bivalent or not,
We are looking at Hindu funding for certainly the Kingsway Court project along the seafront, because we have 3 buildings now that we've worked on that we could already connect. The other one as well would be great for a heat network. So in principle, we could develop 2 heat networks in Brighton and Hove because we have the housing density there for both of them. And that would be private networks completely independent of the local authority.
Yeah, brilliant. Ben, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the presentation, Kelly. That was really interesting. And apologies if you did actually say this in your presentation and I missed it. I was probably not concentrating on the right bits at the right time. But I was interested to know how you got in front of these people to make your presentations. Are they actually local authority owned schemes at the moment, and you've got network into the local council, or how did they arrive with you?
Yeah, absolutely. They're privately owned, and the freeholder approached us because they're at the point where the boiler was 20 years old and they want to look at solutions in Kingsway Court. The other one, they just have such an inefficient system that they were wasting so much heat that they were desperate for a solution, and they came to us because we've developed this specialism with communal buildings and blocks of flats.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Kayla. Michael, do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks. It's Kayla. The point about the local authorities and the heat network zoning is relevant. Our local authority's has had a Hindu study about which they say should pose that heat networks are difficult in our area because of lack of the amount of infrastructure, but they haven't released it. And we've been asking for a year, and they haven't actually done so yet. Do we need to be looking at FOI to get this kind of information out of local authorities?
What a brilliant question. I'm just constantly engaging with the local authority, trying to push them to work with us. And I think we have done FOIs before to expose our local authority because they had a 5 million energy efficiency pot for years in the budget that they never allowed us to work with them to spend. And it didn't go anywhere, Michael. And I think the best bet for us with our local authorities is to just keep engaging with them, keep going back to them, keep bothering them until we are just such a pain in their thorn in their side that they have to work with us. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, kind of agree. Thanks.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, the FOIs, they kind of get lost in the system now as well, don't they? Get a bit buried. So I was just going to ask quickly as well, actually, Kayla. So in terms of grid capacity, has that been a barrier to either of these potential sites?
That is, it probably will be at some point. First Croft has quite a bit of land, so we might be able to overcome it because we can put quite a lot of solar. I didn't mention that, but we can get about 280 kilowatts of solar on that roof. And maybe with battery storage, we could overcome some of the grid constraints. I think grid constraints are going to be a problem with most of the projects that we develop.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kayla. And I was just going to say, actually, Robbie, could you put your new report, Regen report, in the chat, the link? So Regen have got electrification, the local, what's it called, challenge, Robbie? Local.
It's the local grid challenge as
The
well.
local grid challenge, yes. So
I'll just pop it
it's
in there.
great that you're banging that drum at Regen. We've been banging that drum for a while. So and my REMA response was banging that drum really hard as well. So, and that really speaks to kind of smart local energy systems and the interface to the work that we're doing with the on the SIF and Project Leon and blah blah blah. So and I'll bring you in here, Daniel, because obviously you're doing that with a slightly different slant on, but would it be worth you just saying, I know you've got a question as well, but at the same time, can you talk a bit about your EV project as well, Daniel?
Yeah, of course. I'll do the question first. So Kayla, I know we've been in touch about edge data centers, small data centers, and my colleague Brian is supposed to be catching up with you about that. Just a quick question. Is there any sort of spare space in plant rooms or things like that in these buildings if we wanted to put a small edge data center in there to generate excess heat for the building?
Martin, do you know the answer to that question?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of space, but sometimes it's quite difficult to get to.
Right, okay.
Well, you only have to get to it once.
Yeah, but there's old kit left in there because you can't get it out.
Oh.
Or it's covered in asbestos or something like that, you know.
There is
sorry.
the digital exchange in Brighton is the guy's got the office next to it. He's actually taking power from that. The digital exchange is actually set up as a co-op for the tech businesses around that building. So there's already stuff happening on this in Brighton, which we could maybe go on the back of. But I think this is a great amazing projects, and really keen to see if the edge data center excess heat can sort of shift the dial in terms of making them a bit more commercial.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that we cooperate with anyone who wants to work with us. It's in our DNA. And so, Daniel, we definitely would do our best to see if there's a way that we can work with you.
Brilliant. And as Kate set me up on this one, we're also we've just had some funding through from Innovate UK as part of their vehicle to grid trials, or V2X it's called, where looking at storing power from renewables into cars, which I think, looking at the chipping project that Derek's presented in the past, we see that this can be part of that low cost storage process. So for those, for the flats that you've just looked at, you could be storing power from the solar in the vehicles, but then that could be going back into the building at night, or to do the heating and things like that. And the economics of it, they're not too bad. But also particularly for rural areas, you get to fixed mobility, which is a big issue, with rural buses being taken out the equation. I won't take us too far off into the world of V2X though on this call.
Well, it's good to know. It's good to know that you were working on it, Daniel, because it's something that we want to bring in to things like Net Zero Terrace Streets as part of that whole systems approach. And just while I'm on that point, so whole systems approach, we have managed to get a workshop in the diary for this Friday in Salford to try and bring people from DESNZ from their different silos to talk about whole systems approach. So we'll be presenting on Rossendale, the Net Zero Terrace Street project. Derek's going to be doing a presentation on chipping. We've got Jonathan from Carbon Co-op. I think he's talking about people-powered retrofit. We've also got somebody from Rufus Grantham's team talking about their approach. They're working in Bristol and kind of the neighbourhood approach. But we've got people from, Devolution team, Fuel Poverty team, Heat Pump Ready, Green Home Finance Accelerator, REMA, because all these, the trouble is that I was thinking DESNZ is so siloed. And, you know, we've gone for various competitions. We've got the LEAD funding, so that's Local Energy Advice Demonstrator, but we didn't get Heat Pump Ready. We didn't get Flex Unlocked. And I kind of say to DESNZ, well, if we had funding that crossed over as a whole systems approach and looked at how do you decarbonise terrace streets, then we'd have a really good shot at that. But they're so specific. So it's the objective of the workshop is to try and just push them to think outside their silos and try and join the dots between those silos, and also to try and put a bit of policy asked to them as well. And I don't know whether I can perhaps ask Derek. We've got about 17 minutes, Derek. I know you've done 5 slides for Friday. Is it worth just flagging, going through those really quickly? Because in thinking about the consultation that we're going to be doing for the barriers to community energy, I think Derek pulls out some really important points on the policy that we need in place. So I don't know whether, Derek, you're able to just run through that really quickly.
Yep, sure.
I say really quickly, I mean, it's 5 slides.
I'll just I'll just share my screen. Is everyone seen that?
Yep.
Yeah.
So only got a couple of minutes. So Chipping, village in rural Lancashire, just 15 miles northeast of Preston, comprises a very old village centre, as you can see in the photo, lots of listed buildings, conservation zones. But most importantly, from our point of view, it has a working group who are absolutely determined to do something for their village, and have been working on that. Kate will correct me here, but I think it's close to 4 years now in terms of that. They know all the problems, and they sort of keep coming up against the same old challenges. But the challenges Chipping are coming up against will be the same challenges that many dispersed rural villages will also be coming up against. So we see Chipping as very representative of many rural villages. 15% of the properties in the village are keen to join a low carbon heat scheme. 30% of the interest in the scheme, however, is outside of the village, probably in individual buildings or very small clusters. And all the work we've done highlights the level of cost involved in trying to provide a village-wide network. We were also involved as a business in Swaffham Prior, so we've been through that process of delivering heat networks in rural villages. And the other big factor here is that if you did have to create a village-wide hydraulically linked network, you would have a very high percentage of the community that was left behind, just because they're outside of the village itself. So the lowest cost solution that we've found for Chipping is to develop clusters of boreholes supplying individual dwellings with their heat on a standing charge model. And to do this on a phased basis. There are lots of benefits we see from this approach in villages like Chipping, in terms of the fact that you can significantly reduce pre-development risk and cost, in terms of the third-party land agreements, highway agreements that you need to do. If you can put boreholes in people's private gardens, you don't need permitted development rights, and staying out of the highway is always helpful. It also allows us to reduce the dependency on signing up a high level of the village phase 1. So Swaffham Prior, I think, needed something like 70% sign up to be viable, and they're still working towards that. It allows us to then target those properties that are most willing and able in the early phases, as we bring on board the wider community to both the concept of community-owned heat and the concept of heat pump derived heat. And it allows us to focus on those properties that are perhaps paying the most for their energy in terms of, say, electrical heating, or those that are coming up to replacing their existing heating system, so have that decision to make, or are just really keen to make that transition now. As I say, it's very phase driven, and the primary intent is that we're not locking people out just because they don't happen to live within the village or next to properties that are interested, share that vision. So the model is based around a dwelling-owned heat pump and a community-owned borehole on a standing charge model. That could be through a community benefit society or community land trust. The aims are to provide a cost of heat that is no higher than an air source heat pump, including for the standing charge, and to provide a sustainable return to the community investors, whilst also providing a surplus to allow for the ongoing growth of that scheme. Now, that's really challenging, as has become apparent from everyone else's talks this morning and the wider conversation. And it creates these dependencies, a dependency to drive down the cost of delivering that system. And there are opportunities, if you can do this at community scale, through replication, through economies of scale and standardization, to bring those costs down. There are also opportunities, we believe, to bring the cost of consent down, and I'll go on and talk about that on the next slide. But it also creates this dependency on what we call value-added services, so non-heat based income, and whether that's generated from community-owned renewable energy or local energy trading or flexibility services. But they all play a role in generating revenue to bring the cost of heat down for these sorts of rural communities. And the big advantage, there are many disadvantages for rural communities, but the big advantage for rural communities is they do have a bit more space in terms of hosting community-owned renewable energy schemes, as one example. So the barriers, unsurprisingly, the startup costs, they're all front-loaded, and there's significant amount of risk and costs there for communities to come to terms with. However, certainly in the case of chipping, and I'm sure will be similar in many dispersed rural communities, the cost for delivering community heat is significantly lower on this kind of phased property by property basis than it would be through a village-wide network. There are consenting challenges, and even though you can rely on permitted development rights in many cases, you can't do that in every case. And in some cases, properties don't have any garden, and so you're looking at running pipes or boreholes in the public highway. So we have to deal with highways at some point. There is a general absence of grants for rural properties at the moment, although the Green Heat Network Fund doesn't preclude rural properties. Its reliance on hydraulically linked projects and its focus on competitive bids means that it's highly unlikely that dispersed rural communities will ever be able to put in a sufficiently competitive bid to stand a chance of accessing the Green Heat Network Fund. So it does create this dependency on the wider added value that is out there, we believe, in terms of renewables, community scale flexibility services, and wider opportunities like that. And the other issue that we keep coming up against is this lack of evidence of exemplar projects that stakeholders and members of the community can go and see and get comfortable with, and generally get confidence that this scheme can deliver for them, either as a stakeholder or as a heat off taker. So in terms of the policy ask, and if anyone has wider opportunities that we should be putting in front of DESNZ this Friday, then please let me know. But in terms of the policy ask that we believe is key here, we see a real need for short-term capital grant funding to get some exemplar demonstration projects up and running to prove the case for these communities. And in the longer term, we certainly see a case for a gigawatt voucher to do much the same thing that Gigabyte voucher did for transition. I think it's now 12,000 rural properties in the Northwest onto rural data networks, where the commercial model failed to give rural data to those homes. I think there's an opportunity to tweak the planning system in terms of permitted development rights. So at the moment, if your borehole's in your curtilage, you don't need planning permission. If it's outside of your curtilage, even if it's on your land, the other side of your fence, you do need planning permission. So I think there's the opportunity to adjust the planning system just to extend natural permitted development rights for boreholes, and that would save a level of cost and complexity for these sort of community schemes going through. within shipping, there's a United Utilities wastewater treatment plant on a 200 kVA substation. And so there is an opportunity to sell locally generated solar PV to a public utility. But it's really difficult and really challenging to negotiate with United Utilities. So if we could place an obligation on public authorities and utility companies to acquire electricity from community groups on agreed terms, where those community groups can do so on those terms, I think that would provide really useful revenue for these types of community groups. And then around the settlement code and legislation, there is more work to be done in terms of increasing the drivers to facilitate real-time energy trading and flexibility. We're working with small-scale renewable generation projects across the country where there's absolutely no capacity to export above the 3 kilowatts per phase into the grid, and those constraints are largely driven by very specific constraint periods within the 24-hour period. So in the southwest, it may be that you're constrained between 11 and 4 in the afternoon because of solar, but the peak demand in the evenings, there's plenty of spare capacity on that grid, and so it's forcing the DNOs in a structured, coordinated way to open up that capacity to local communities. So on balance, we certainly see an opportunity here at community scale to shift the dial, but we really need some support in terms of these wider value-added opportunities to open up that scale and hopefully create a wider opportunity for many more communities across the UK. So that's my pitch. Kate, thank you.
Thanks, Derek. So yeah, if you do have any thoughts on what we need to be saying to DESNZ on Friday, as I say, there's 4 different presentations from different community groups, basically banging the same drum, saying we need a whole systems approach. We need grant funding, we need pilots, we need local energy markets that fit in with smart local energy systems. But if you've got any other ideas, then do drop me an email, and hopefully, Duncan, we can push these into the barriers to community energy consultation, which I don't know whether Duncan, do you want to give an update on where you're up to on that consultation?
Yeah, very briefly, we did some talking about this a couple of meetings ago. I think the link to that discussion is in the agenda, and the bit.ly link to our guidance on the consultation is also there, bit.ly/CEE-barriers. We have a question by question guide there, but there's very, very little in our thinking so far around heat. So please do, if you do nothing else, take on the heat issues. If you want to do an outline, narrowly focused response on heat and share it with us, that would help us produce our consultation response, which necessarily is going to have to be fairly overarching. We will be aiming to produce a catalogue of all the barriers and then point to organisations who have or responses that have more detail. Yeah, do it, please. It's really important that we get lots of responses in, and channel your pain.
So you did a workshop last week on this, didn't you, Duncan?
Yes.
Are there going to be any more workshops, or it's the end of June, isn't it? Has to be in.
Yes, 30th of June. Community Energy London is doing a workshop tomorrow. If you're in London, I'm not sure that it's on their webpage, but I will kick them today to make sure that it is. In fact, we could put the link in the chat before the end of the meeting if you're in London. And Region is doing one on the 5th of June. That will be on the Region website. And Robbie could stick a link in maybe.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Duncan. Sorry, I skipped over the agenda a wee bit there, but does anybody have any updates on the heat network zoning? I know, Sydney, you've done quite a lot of work on this. Has anybody got any additional comments on heat zoning at all?
Do you want to wait until I do my spiel and then it'll all come out there, maybe?
Oh, so did you present last time, Sydney?
Sorry?
Did you present you presented in March?
Yeah, but I had on the agenda that we were going to have a discussion about the conclusions and where we could go from now. Is that not on the agenda?
Sorry if I missed that off. Continuation discussion I've got there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sydney did a presentation, but there wasn't time at the earlier meeting to have a discussion, and we really want to channel what we're going to do about it. Otherwise, it'll run away from us, and we won't have an opportunity to do anything about it. So,
is it still open? Is it the consultation still open?
no, it's post consultation.
Yeah, post consultation.
Yeah. I wasn't going to go through the slides again, but the one at the end was where I asked questions to be discussed, but we didn't have time for that. So I was just going to show that one slide again.
Right, okay. Do you want to show that slide now?
Yeah, I think that would be.
It will give people a chance to
have
a think about that. I mean, my thoughts on the heat zoning, I did speak to Kenza about this the other day. I mean, at the moment, it's not for domestic. But then, you know, having listened to
it is for domestic for new estates.
Yeah.
It's just that the developers put it all in, and then, you know, the domestic people that move in then have got it. So
yeah,
it's not quite as simple as that. So I'll put this on the screen. If I can just go back to Kayla and say, you depressed me, Kayla. I was hoping you'd come up with a lovely model I could put to our board in my estate, because our gas boilers are getting a bit old. But I'm afraid you didn't really persuade me that I could do that now. But you did come up with some good things which can go in that barriers for community needing to be involved with the heat zones, which is relevant here. So I ended up with these questions in my talk a couple of months ago. And I just wanted to run through them with a little bit more background information. I also wonder, can I ask you, Joseph, have you managed to look through this presentation? Because I know you haven't been here long.
I don't think so, no. And I was about to say I can't see the top question because it's not quite full screen.
Oh, is that because I'm not on full screen? How do I do that? How do I do that?
I'm just thinking, for the sake of time, if everyone can have a look at those questions, take a mental snapshot of those questions and be thinking of those, I think, to feed into the barriers to community energy as well, Duncan. Or Duncan, do you want to set up a Google Docs with these questions and people can start adding notes to them in between now and our next working group? What do you think, Duncan?
That sounds like a good idea. We will certainly circulate them in the follow-up email, so people can, with a link to that document, so people can go in and respond.
Yeah, you did have a link to it. In fact, I mean, if I could just go through the questions with a little bit of background.
Sorry, Sydney, it's 11 o'clock now and I've got another meeting to jump onto.
Oh, right, okay. I thought I was given time for this discussion.
Sorry. So I think
on this occasion.
That's my fault, and I apologise for that. But if we can make this into a live document, and Duncan will.
I mean, it is there already. It was in the agenda.
We'll make it
a couple of months ago, so I didn't have a lot of response. I was hoping to have a discussion now.
I can hold the meeting for a bit longer, or Joseph can, if people want to stay and have a short discussion around that. The only last things I would beg is that people respond to me and Joseph with requests for future agenda items, issues that they see are important that we should gather our intelligence and get input on, or particular opportunities they want to present on or they are requesting presentation on, and then we'll look for somebody to present. So please do email that. And lastly, there's a link in the agenda to our election work. I'll stick that in the chat. please do get stuck in. Our requests are shout about what you're doing as far and wide as possible through as many channels as possible. The argument is community energy is win-win-win, and nobody can then not adopt it or can pour cold water on it. Then meet your candidates and show them. And then finally, if you have capacity, make a plan to do other stuff. And all of that, resources around that are on our website at the link I will put in the chat shortly. Joseph, are you able to hold the discussion for a bit longer? If anybody wants to stay and feed into Sydney?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
I think I need to put that thing in the chat and then drop off for another meeting. Apologies. Thank you, everybody, for contributing. That was a fascinating meeting.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks all.
So have we got Joseph then hosting anyone that wants to say anything? Because I did have some points I wanted to make. One of which was that I quote the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers and Share Energy and Citizen Advice and local government committee comments in here. So, you know, those of you who belong to those, it would be a particular interest to check up what I say there, quoting from them. So I don't quite know how to take this now, because I was going to go through these points one at a time and see what we thought we might be able to do about it, because the consultation has closed. But as I said, quite a few organisations have got serious issues with heat zones. With the major thing of, if you're not in a heat zone, then all of those good things that you've been discussing earlier won't be getting support, which to my mind is, you know, the very big thing. And also there's no evidence really of the claims of low cost and low carbon from the research that I've done. So does anyone want to chip in of, do we want to follow up on this and have a CE response?
Chip in a bit of what
input on this.
Chip in a bit of what, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Chip a bit of one, because I've had a bit of involvement in the SAP groups and stuff on zoning and that. I mean, I think the general view is that you've got to be in certain dense areas for it to be sort of, to force people to go onto heat networks or to steer them in that way. It's got to be dense, it's got to add up. There is evidence of efficient heat networks. The vast majority of them aren't. That's the kind of the whole point of all the optimization and the new regs and codes of practice and all of that. So it's possible to do it right if you design things right, install them right, and do the acceptance testing and all that. But you know, it's a bit of a secret sauce, but people do it now. People like Martin help people get these networks. So it's possible, and there's recorded data on them being efficient. So that's the thing. If you're in a dense enough area, it can work. So if you're going to zone an area and almost like push people onto these networks, it's very difficult to make them efficient in low density housing. It's a much more skill, much more capital investment to do so. So it's a bit of a no-brainer almost, you could say, in a very dense area, which is sort of the zoning targets initially. You can't apply the same kind of thinking to less dense areas of housing though. That's the sort of, I suppose, the background philosophy behind it.
I probably should have emphasised that I'm absolutely in favour of district heat networks where they do provide low carbon, low cost solutions. But the assumption of the whole consultation was that all district heat networks were necessarily low carbon, low cost. And in the example that I've been studying for Enfield, your point about density is absolutely proved, because the correct answer there for their local area energy plans and for everything else is that they have 2,000 kilometres of pipes at, I think, 300 tonnes of carbon per kilometre, but they will spread that over 100 years and not be too bothered about that. So that is a good example of where it's not density, but they are wanting people to connect to it even though it's not dense, and that then ignores all the. Then they're assuming that the heat zoning consultation is assuming that people will be required to provide their heat. For instance, data centres. Now, I think was it Richard who was talking about take the data centre to where you need the heat rather than for data centres and tell them they've got to provide heat.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're seeing quite an increase in data centres in server rooms with a CO2 heat pump system bolted on the back of it. So it's keeping the room cool, and it's putting out 80 degree C heat that you can pipe into any traditional heating network. So there is.
So the things that can be taken to where the heat is needed is data centres, but also boreholes, which you've also been discussing.
Boreholes are probably the most. Boreholes are probably the most difficult infrastructure to put in place. Well, they're one of
suitable in some cases. I've been to see the one right in the middle of the City of London, and that.
They definitely have their place. Yeah,
so they've got a good place. But if the designation of the heat zones is basically to serve a network that's spread around, then you're not looking at take the heat to where it's needed. As I said, I live in a block of flats and we've got old gas boilers. I'm not seeing anyone going to Kayla and saying, "Oh, please help us here." That's another barrier.
You're sort of in an area where so as it gets less dense, it becomes more difficult. It doesn't become more impossible. It's to do with the pipe sizing and where you put storage on the network. So certainly when you're looking at like larger city schemes like we are, it's the drivers at the moment to get the temperature drops high. So at the moment these networks are running like 10 degrees C.
But I don't think anyone is saying the whole country could be served by district heat networks. It's just a question of finding where is it suitable. Density is one point, and then there are other solutions where it's not suitable.
Yeah, it's not a black and white thing. You have to look at the local technical layout, the heat sources, the pipe sizing, and the maths, and it will come out whether at what point is better to just put a local system in or to ditch a heat network. But certainly we find when you get to single houses.
Well, one of the quotations from CIPSE is the methodology for carbon limits in this consultation must be reviewed to truly account for the carbon emissions of networks. In that we really need consistent and evidence-based carbon assessments of each case, not the assumption that all heat networks are necessarily low carbon. Martin, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so I think the issue is who's going to own these things. And so I was talking to somebody from DESNZ quite recently, and I was quizzing him as to whether all that private, they're trying to attract in loads of private money, and I was trying to work out if he'd fess up to me whether that was politically motivated, because that's the way Tories do things, or whether we think Labour would also have the same, let's draw in all this private money and then we lose control as a kind of people, as somebody who lives in Thames Waters area, where we just think, it hasn't really been a good model of private sector involvement into monopoly utilities. And I mean, his response obviously was quite political, but basically the government hasn't got enough money for all this, whatever hue the government ends up. But how are we actually going to control these things? Because ultimately, whether the heat network serves the community, it depends who owns it. And if it's owned by American private equity, they've got a slightly different point of view to if it's owned by people much closer to who are the customers. And as somebody who's worked in a private sector heat network operator, whenever you get to a new customer, everybody sits around the table thinking, what's in it for me, rather than what's in it to do the right thing for the carbon and the community. And
that's some of the issues I brought in on.
Yeah, I know, and I really don't think, I haven't really read the consultation in enough detail. I started it, but the bits I've read, and the answers I've got, I don't think they've really worked out how they're going to manage in the long term what these heat network operators charge. They haven't really done their homework on that and how that's going to be regulated and how that's going to be controlled. So, I mean, I think the push should be that somehow the community sector should try and get involved. And where public money is put into these things, it shouldn't be given to the private sector. Any public money put in should rest with the local authority or the community somehow. So at least some say in the huge investment actually is rested with people who've got a motivation for the community, not a motivation for profit. Because there's going to be this heat network, and there's going to be every operator now is desperate to get their foot in the toe in the water in every town, because the people who are already there are going to get a better deal, and it's just, you know, and then people are going to grab lots, and they're going to be sold on afterwards. I recently read a book about the early train rail privatization, and those early franchises was chaos, and some people made a killing and other people didn't, and you just feel. And some worked out quite well, others worked out disastrously. I just think this heat network zoning is going to be the same, and that there's going to be some people going to make a killing out of it. And if somebody's making a killing out of it, it's all to the detriment of everybody, you know, the actual country.
Well, this is a point that I've included from Share Energy, comparing the whole concept with the privatisation of rail. So you're totally agreeing there, and that's one of my main problems. But even when it comes to carbon saving, and I've got a slide showing that, they're not even aspiring to save any carbon until 2038. Well, what state are we going to be in then? Yeah. Whereas the sort of schemes that you've been talking about could be delivered next year if we had a sympathetic government.
I think it's a long and complicated process. I disagreed with the carbon levels in the consultation, because in some places it's much easier to save carbon than in other places.
Indeed,
if you've got mines water at the surface at 15 degrees, you can have a much more efficient heat pump than if you haven't got that. And so and then that means the place with an easy heat source doesn't have to work as hard as it could, and other places are set with some challenge which is kind of impossible. So I think the carbon saving should be as much as you can achieve on a cost curve, because ultimately money's limited, and once you've got the network, you can decarbonise over time much quicker. You know, that's part of the heat network benefit. You can change the heat source in a heat network much quicker than change the heat source in 3,000 houses. So, but yeah, I'm not quite sure where to go on this.
Here of you've got to have the what's it called, the density. And it needs to be case by case, but you do need actually a sound model to apply those cases to, which we haven't got, and the consultation didn't have that. It made assumptions.
But the whole consultations are farce, because to get the density you need domestic, but they're not in a position to, they're not going to get the legislation through if they enforce domestic connection. So if you look at a city like Coventry, I did this work for Bays, 80% of the heat load is private domestic. But they can't put that in the legislation because it won't go through. But actually, that's where all the heat load is. So if you just go around doing the library and
compulsion on the sort of, you know, estates with communal heating already, and said if a heat network near them, they must connect. So, you know, just thinking, oh, it doesn't affect domestic is really not the case.
Well, it doesn't affect most domestic.
Well, as I said, I live in a block of flats, and they could potentially be told to connect. If it's convenient for the company that owns the pipes, we could be told to connect. And if it isn't convenient, we've got no incentive to put in the ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps. Duncan, do you want to come in there?
You're on mute, Duncan.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go, and I'm recording this meeting, and I can't go until it ends. What I wondered whether we could pull our thinking around, we will share these questions, but pull our thinking around to what we as a sector and as CEE need to do in the way of headbutting whom to get the right outcomes. I really like what Martin said about it's important who owns it, and it's, you know, the regulation's a mess. Well, Ofgem will be regulating it, so should we be opening conversations with whoever they've appointed at Ofgem to regulate the heat network zoning, to say, you know, these are our contentions. This is how we think it should be regulated. Can we have an ongoing discussion to co-develop it? So I just need input for me, really.
I think actually, Duncan, putting stuff in the Barry's to Community Energy is a good step in that direction. Maybe we should have more steer as to what to put in there, because that's our opportunity at the moment, isn't it, to try and influence a future government?
Yes, it is. I think we need to be clear about who are the stakeholders are whom they must engage. Otherwise they'll go, oh, that's a difficult bit of a corner. We'll say that's a difficult bit of a corner and the regulator should take charge, and no push to action will happen. I think if we want to engage in change, we probably need to go out there and find the person and sit them down, a bit like Kate's done with this round table. But equally, you know, my question about the round table is, how do we make sure that those people don't go back to their silos and don't really ever think about this again? We need to say to them, you now need to convene a whole systems round table internally, and you need to meet every month. Otherwise, you will have wasted your train fare and our time. So we need to be insisting that, you know, the instruments are in place. That means we can continue to dialogue and they can be facing in the right direction on change. And I'm just thinking in sort of heat network terms, should we be taking a delegation to Ofgem and saying, we need to meet your people, and when they come, if they're not in post, you need to contact us when they are. I don't have the knowledge on this. So I need
stakeholders, but it's just got public servants, whereas obviously you're deep diving that a lot better.
Be good to have a meeting on this, because I mean, we've done things like, I was in Parliament last week trying to do exactly this sort of thing, but it's a bit difficult to sort of go over in 3 minutes when you're about to turn the meeting off. But yeah, you guys have got to get some start attacking these guys in Parliament, because the guys who are writing the regs and the SAP groups are not doing it with the community interests at heart. That all the power is at the community, and it's just it just needs organising to actually sort of change the whole dynamics of the industries where we sit. There's all the powers in the residents' hands, and everyone's terrified of it, but it's never motivated or organised to have the right effect.
Okay, we need to have a meeting. Jesus, I think I'm going to have to come back to the working group email with having talked to Joseph and maybe you and Martin on this, and Sydney.
That would be good. I think it would be good if Joseph had time to actually go through it, because that's going to be your job, isn't it, Joseph? To see what he thinks might be the way forward. We need a way forward. As I said, I've quoted the Chartered Institute of Building Engineers, Share Energy, Citizens Advice, data centre owners. You know, they've all got serious issues. And okay, they put them in the consultation, but the consultation missed off all the low carbon options, as I describe here. So yeah, do you want to do that then, Duncan? Sort of close it here, discuss with Joseph, myself, or, you know, Martin, or whoever you think, as to how to take forward.
Yeah, okay, I will put that as an action, and Joseph and I will work out how we take it forward. It's not central to Joseph's role, because he's not doing policy. He's doing joining up and connecting and specific work on Net Zero Terrace Streets and Community Heat Development Unit. So
it'd be good background for him, I think, though.
Yeah, it's just a capacity question. But yeah, if it's all right with everybody, we will share Sydney's questions, and if it already exists, the link to the document. If it doesn't, then we will create one for people to.
It was in the agenda, Duncan. There's the one with the notes and the ones without the notes in the agenda.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So if I can ask people to look at that and still email me, with the issues before Duncan comes up with this meeting, yeah?
Great. Lovely. Thanks for your contribution. And Sydney, I'm really sorry we didn't get to give you a proper time on this. There was obviously a miscommunication, or Kate thought that it was just a tiny agenda point, despite the fact that it was in the main body. But never mind, onward, we will make it work.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to catch what was the action that we wanted to catch, because I haven't written it down.
Right, it's to gather the interested heads, especially around Sydney, Martin and Richard, to work out what we do facing regulation and ownership. Is that fair summation?
Yeah, what we can do to raise those issues and what we want a future government to be doing on it, actually, as well.
But the challenge is to find as Duncan was saying, to find the opportunities where they're actually seeking comment, where they're actually more likely to absorb it.
Where the levers are, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and very
they've asked
often
about the barriers, haven't they? So that's one opportunity.
Yeah, and I think very often that can be in direct relationship rather than through some kind of consultation process. If we build an alliance and a collaboration, then that's more likely to have a useful output.
I would say contact Alan Whitehead, because he's standing down.
Yeah.
He made some good comments about this. Well, about shortage of civil servants being redirected to the wrong place, with comments he made.
Thank you very much, everybody. We're going to have to close the meeting now. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.